Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, Anita Finley.
Good morning, Darwin Porter.
Good morning to you, Anita.
I have to tell you,
excitement going on up here.
I'm sure the Superman was a great hit because we put it on our cover. You don't know that. And it was so perfect when we got that article from you for our April issue.
It's making millions and millions at the box office.
I know.
Now, this is an important day in my life, and it's ironic that it's time with our broadcast, but at long last, a project I started in 1965, remember 1965, has come to fruition, and trucks are moving out today with my epic story of James Dean. It's called Tomorrow Never Comes, and it's honoring the 60th anniversary of his violent death at the age of 24 in a horrible crash of his silver Porsche on the way to a racetrack meeting in Salinas, California. Now, James Dean, believe it or not, his story has never really been told. There have been dozens of books about him, but they were written by people who may have known him just briefly, and they make a whole book out of it. I compare it to almost the tale of the elephant, but they didn't describe the elephant, and so I'll get into it. His name today is amazingly famous, and I'll give you an example. In North Greenland, I found a picture. There are two people that are known from the 50s in Hollywood, Marilyn Monroe and James Dean. I was with some young men and women, millennials, who are musicians, and I just tried a name recognition, and they immediately knew who James Dean and Marilyn Monroe were. But get this. They had never heard of Marlene Dietrich, Clark Gable, Fred Astaire, Davis, Joan Crawford.
Of course not.
The Daily Mail in London, someone must have given them an advanced copy of the book. It's not even in the stores, and they ran this big story on Dean. And once the Daily Mail runs something, it's picked up by 200 newspapers internationally, and all sorts of calls came in, even from Turkey. They want to translate it into Turkish.
Huh. I
didn't know that Dean would be a big name in Turkey, but.
So, Darwin, what was it about him? You know, in an elevator speech, what was it?
Well, that is a question for the ages. And for one thing, he was a dynamic, charismatic thing, but for baby boomers especially, he launched a new era in America. I think young men, boys and girls growing up in the 20s and 30s, it was called Honor Thy Father and Thy Mother. And along comes Dean in the 50s. It was a time where young people began to rebel. Suddenly they had cars. My stepfather gave me a pink Cadillac when I was probably too young to drive it. And we were breaking from our parents and the authority. And in particular in Rebel Without a Cause, he represented that break from parental authority. And then all of a sudden, papers were filled with juvenile delinquency. I don't even think we'd heard that term before. It was James Cagney and crime pictures before. Suddenly it's young people. And all sorts of people came along. In fact, originally, the Rebel Without a Cause was supposed to be a B movie. And instead of the beautiful little Natalie Wood, you won't believe this, but it was supposed to be a trashy blonde with Jimmy Dean, and Jane Mansfield was supposed to be the trashy blonde.
That's good.
But the thing about Dean, now first he's one of Hollywood's most famous bisexuals, and the tabloids abroad and everything are concentrating mostly on his love affairs. He said that I slept with the most famous people in Hollywood, and when I was in Puerto Vallarta with Tennessee Williams, Richard Burton was doing the Night of the Iguana, and Elizabeth Taylor was there with him. And she sort of summed it up. She said, James Dean was a walking streak of sex and ultimately seduced almost everybody in Hollywood, and I should know. And, of course, Elizabeth appeared with him in his last movie, Giant, the Edna Ferber, based on the Edna
I
Ferber.
remember that movie, actually, yes.
But I want now, this is biggest name dropping I will ever deliver on this show, but I drew up a list of just some of the famous people that he seduced, and I've described them in detail of how all of this came about. And I'll first lead off with the women. As I said, be prepared for some name dropping here.
Okay.
Of course, at the top of the list will be Elizabeth Taylor herself, the violet-eyed beauty, Natalie Wood, Marilyn Monroe, Joan Crawford, Judy Garland, Hedy Lamarr, and are you ready? Grace Kelly. Now,
Whoa.
Grace Kelly was originally set to play Leslie in Giant, and then some prince from Monaco came over and lured her away, and the role went to Taylor. But Dean had gotten involved. Now, among the men, in fact, I've written about all of these men before, Marlon Brando, Steve McQueen, Montgomery Clift, Paul Newman, Rock Hudson, Spencer Tracy, and Tennessee Williams. And here's a quote from Dean. Now, I'm going to be a teaser here now and not reveal the names. He said, I also slept with two of the most famous men of the 20th century, and I am not going to tell you who they are. Someone will have to buy the book.
There must be precedents, all I can figure out.
No, not quite that. You can be famous without being a president.
Okay.
And now, I want to throw in some bizarre happenings. He had a brief affair with the Woolworth heiress, Barbara Hutton, whom the press at the time called as famous as Adolf Hitler. And he also then had an affair with Lance Reventlow, who was her son. Or as Dean said, if you make love to the mother, you need to extend your courtesy to the son. That's interesting. In fact, Lance Reventlow was the last person that he talked to at a filling station. He, too, was going to Salinas for the car. Both of them were race car people, and he was to meet Lance that night for dinner. And then they were going off to Lance's retreat in Sun Valley, Idaho. So in a way, Lance Reventlow, by the way, was a charming, wonderful man, but with a difficult mother. And that's just one of the many stories. Now I decided to be provocative. And on the cover, I put not the regular James Dean, but a picture of him holding a revolver and pointing at the head of Ronald Reagan.
Why?
And everyone said that's Photoshop. It's not Photoshop. People don't seem to know this, but Ronald Reagan and James Dean starred in a teleplay called The Dark, Dark Hours in 1954.
Oh.
The part of the plot, he broke into the house of Dr. Ronald Reagan, and he had a companion who had been shot, and he was forcing Reagan to operate on his friend, and he threatened to assassinate Reagan. And as they said, there's been so many stories that it was a Photoshop, but you can now see the Reagan James Dean movie on the TV if you've got the right hookups. But do you find that interesting that he starred with Ronald Reagan?
Amazing. It's just, all this is amazing to me. He was so young, and yet look what he had accomplished and what he was involved in about 5 years?
I know. I said to someone, if he'd lived to be 75, another 50 years, I would have had to do this book in about 10 volumes. And but he was. I know some people don't like him, but he was a symbol of of a generation, but each new generation seems to have adopted him. That's what's amazing. And I was very fortunate. I think I don't want to use the word destined, but there doesn't seem to be anyone left who can write the book. And I was so lucky that I never met Dean, who died in 1955. But beginning in 1959, I started meeting the people who knew him, who worked with him. Let me give you an example. I was the vice president of a TV company in New York, and one of my clients, or bosses, you might call it, was Rogers Brackett, a TV producer. Now, he discovered James Dean in a parking lot next to CBS Studios in Hollywood, and then Dean moved in with him, and Rogers said, we had a father-son relationship, but it was incestuous. And then when he came to New York, my former boss, Stanley Haggart, befriended him, and he stayed at his large apartment, and he got involved with the composer Alec Wilder, another friend of mine. And then in television, I actually got to meet many of the people who are now long gone, who worked with Dean. I'll just give you a few examples. I mean, he worked with many distinguished stars like Jessica Tandy, the famous star Mary Astor, Patricia Neal. Now, oddly enough, it was through Patricia Neal that Dean befriended Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper flew to New York for a final goodbye to Patricia Neal. They had a long affair since 1947, and they were breaking up, and she was going on to Britain to get married. And then Dean, believe it or not, bonded with Gary Cooper, who wanted to play his father in East of Eden. And, of course, he didn't get to do that. But all of these, Patricia Neal was another one. He was going to make a movie with Lauren Bacall, and Dean had actually appeared in a movie called Deadline USA. Many people dispute that. However, I was hired to do the narration in the re-release of Deadline USA, where they show the movie and then a narrator comes on. I did the narration, and lo and behold, there was James Dean. And so I deny all the other books. Dean was with Bogey in Deadline USA. Now, he never made the movie with Bacall because the studio wouldn't release him. But Bogey hated Dean and called him the little bastard and the little punk. And he didn't endear Bogey either when one afternoon late, Bogey was supposed to be gone for the evening, but he returned home and found Dean doing something inappropriate with Lauren Bacall. Bogey was said to have kicked him out on his butt, but he didn't use the word butt.
Yes, I'm sure. I have a question about all this. So, he decided to be an actor when he was very young. Where did he grow up, and when was he talented, other than being very attractive and all?
Yes, he was an extremely talented actor. Originally compared too much to Marlon Brando, whom he had sort of an S&M relationship throughout his life. But he was just a Hoosier farm boy. His mother died when she was 29, and he was just sent. His father never liked his son, although the father ended up getting the estate. They never liked each other, and so he sent him back to live with his aunt and uncle, who were like second parents to him. And he grew up in like a Hoosier farm boy, but he showed an early talent for a kind of acting that had rarely been seen before. Again, except for Brando. Brando, he was constantly called a clone of Brando, and he developed eventually his own style. And then he decided he wanted to go to Hollywood and become famous, and just a series of. It was actually, he met the right people, and I've outlined the whole thing of how Well, I said, from the parking lot, he became one of the. Listen, you've got to in life. You've got to be in the right parking lot. Now, I was very fortunate then throughout my life to know people. Believe it or not, his closest woman friend was Eartha Kitt.
Really?
As I've told you before, I wrote a movie, shot in Florida with starring Eartha Kitt, among others. And during our long time in Florida together during the shooting of that movie, which was actually Key West, Florida, and she told me a story that I had never heard before. First, she said, I call him my soul brother, and he calls me his soul sister. And she said, but I've never told anyone this. But she said, I fell in love with Arthur Lowe Jr. Now, Arthur Lowe Jr., that you may remember the famous Lowe's theater chain.
Of course, yes.
And Arthur Lowe was the theater heir. His grandfather had helped found Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer on the maternal side, and on the paternal side, his grandfather had founded Paramount Pictures. So he was theater elite. And he has just coming down from an affair with Elizabeth. There we go again, Elizabeth Taylor. I also wrote a book about her.
Yes, I know that. It's a great book.
However, his parents were very old Hollywood royalty, and they said, well, first, interracial marriages are illegal, and you'll be disgraced. You'll disgrace your family. And the mother was a very powerful woman, and she broke up the romance of Eartha Kitt and Arthur Lowe, the junior Arthur Lowe. And then Eartha told me one night on a yacht that we were sailing to Tortugas off the coast of Key West, and she said one night I tried to get through to Arthur, and I still had his private number, which rang through to the bedroom, and I called him, hoping that he would defy his mother and go with me. And she said, I was shocked. Guess who picked up the phone? I recognized his voice. It was James Dean.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. I was wondering where this was going.
What's that?
I was wondering where this was going. So bringing him back in. He never stopped, did he?
In the last weeks of now, believe it or not, their friendship continued. In the last weeks of James Dean's life, he went to live with Arthur Lowe Jr., and he still continued his friendship, but it was a shock to her, and she said, actually, it was heartbreaking. And believe it or not, the mother, the powerful mother, she said, miscegenation is illegal. And he would disgrace me if he had married a black woman. And she said at that time, homosexuality was also illegal. However, I'd rather my son be with Jimmy Dean than Eartha Kitt.
Oh, my heavens.
She said, at least Arthur and James Dean would be accepted in Hollywood, which is riddled. You couldn't go to a Hollywood party without running into dozens of homosexuals. But with a black-white marriage, it just was not acceptable in our family. And no one has ever got that story before. And I fill the book with stories like that.
Of course. You always wind up knowing all these things. And that's what makes your books so important and sensational.
It went on forever. Could you imagine James Dean and Sarah Churchill? Now, there were two Sarah Churchills. I knew the second Sarah Churchill from Britain. But I'm talking about the daughter of Sir Winston. She called herself the black sheep of the Churchill family. And now, how would he meet Sarah Churchill? Well, Rogers Brackett, his sponsor, also hired Sarah Churchill. And I'm sure your parents in the 50s saw the TV Hallmark Hall of Fame. And Sarah was the moderator or the host of the show. Hostess, we called it back then. And it was through Rogers Brackett that he became involved with Sarah Churchill. I mean, this guy was amazing.
You were being very kind about my parents, but I have to tell you, I remember that show.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to tell you something about Eartha Kitt I've never shared with you. I was brought up to do a television show on our new book, Live to be 100 Plus, in 1992. And they were showing about people who were older and still great. And Eartha Kitt was on the show with me. She was lovely. She was just sexy. And so I had a little bit of Eartha Kitt for 2 minutes.
Yeah. But she was wonderful with me, and you know, we established a friendship. And in fact, she was one of the people I dedicated the book to because she helped me so much. But as you know from my previous talks, I was also a friend of Miss Tallulah Bankhead of Alabama. And now, Tallulah Bankhead and James Dean is such an unlikely thing. But in the 50s, Tallulah had this big show on radio, which was a big hit. And Joan Davis, the blonde comedian, Jimmy was dating her daughter, Beverly Wills. And that was one of his early romances. And he was at the Davis house, and Davis often appeared as a guest. Davis had made many movies. She often appeared as a guest on Tallulah Bankhead's radio show. So Tallulah was coming over for dinner. And the mother wanted Dean to leave, but he insisted on staying. So he met Tallulah Bankhead, and they became great friends and formed an unlikely relationship that continued in New York when they were both staying at the Algonquin Hotel. It's just amazing how. But I know from knowing Tennessee Williams that once you meet a famous person, like if you met Tennessee Williams, you would eventually meet Paul Newman, Marlon Brando, Geraldine Page. So I know how those things worked. And Dean was. Now there was something though about Dean that was so charismatic as a personality that, as it was explained to me by one person, he was someone you wanted to mother. I mean, to adopt. To, forgive me, take unto your breast. I mean that symbolically, of course.
Tell me his size. Was he tall? I thought he was short.
He was about just quite 5'10".
And he was very slim, wasn't he?
Yes, he was not a big guy. He didn't have a particularly great body. You know, some of his competitors, like Tab Hunter, looked like Greek statues, but it was this quality. And now I want to say we have to go soon. But
I know, but wait, tell me the name of the book so everybody can buy it again. What is it called?
James Dean, Tomorrow Never Comes.
Tomorrow Never Comes. Okay.
It was sort of a sad title,
right?
But I want to give you some final advice that James Dean gave all of us.
Okay.
Here it is. I want to quote it directly. Dream as if you'll live forever. Live as if you'll die today.
Wow. And that's what he believed.
Well, I thought, I told his aunt and uncle I went to Indiana, Fairmont, Indiana, to visit with them because I wanted a story about his youth. And they had never heard that quote. And I said, you know, I think that should have been put on his tombstone.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it was very sad that happened, but fortunately, he had done enough in his life that he is an important person. And I'm glad that you decided that would be the person you're going to write about, because I know your next book is on Donald Trump. So at least you got over this one.
I've enjoyed talking to you because it has given me a break from Donald Trump.
Oh, my.
I do nothing but live, breathe, and sleep Donald Trump. I didn't plan to do it. My bosses told me to do it. But I'll tell you, they have sure helped me out because I've been shipped boxes and boxes of material. I think I know now more about Donald Trump than he knows about him.
That I'm sure of. Well, thank you so much, Darwin. I know that it's never enough time with us, but I appreciate it so much. We all know a lot more about James Dean, and we'll be looking for your book, James Dean, Tomorrow Never Comes, and we'll be looking forward to our next conversation. And take good care of yourself.
It sounds like you've got a good show coming up.
All right, honey. You're my best show. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.